Good morning, second and third grade students. So this week for science, we are going to be focusing on talking about heat and thermal energy. So first off, we're going to be talking about something called the thermometer. So this is something that you might have in your house. And the thermometer tells us the temperature. Many times we have these outside, so they tell us what the temperature is outside. You might also have ones inside of your house so that you know how warm or cold your house is. And then there's even thermometers that are really fancy, and they will tell you both the temperature outside and inside your house. So temperature is measured in different scales. So the two scales that are shown on this thermometer are Celsius and Fahrenheit. So we see up here we have the little degree sign with the F next to it that tells us that this is in Fahrenheit degrees. And then on the right side we have the degree sign with the C, which tells us that this is in Celsius degrees. All right, so here are some key vocab words that we are going to be looking at. So first off, again, is temperature. So temperature is a degree of hotness or coldness that can be measured using a thermometer. Next is going to be thermal energy. So this is the energy an object has because of the movement of its molecules, and heat can be transferred from one object to another object. So remember last week we had talked about molecules, and we had talked about that in something that is cold. The molecules are going to be very close to each other and not move very fast. And then in something that is hot, the molecules are going to move very fast and rapid and take up a lot more space. All right, our next vocab word is heat, and heat is a form of energy. Now, this next sentence I bolded and underlined it because this is going to be very important for you to remember for your IXL standards. So heat flows from hot objects to cool objects. So heat will always flow from the hot object to the cool object. And then another word that we have is insulators. So an insulator is a material such as rubber or glass that is a poor conductor of electricity, heat, or sound. So basically an insulator, it's not allowing electricity, heat, or sound to move through it. All right, and then we have three more vocab terms we're going to be looking at. This is going to be the main three that we're going to be talking about in the rest of this lesson. So the first word is conduction. So conduction is the transfer or movement of heat between two objects that are touching. So an example of that would be roasting marshmallows and the heat from the fire to the metal stick. So probably many of you have gone camping before or had a fire in your backyard, and maybe you're making s'mores or you're just roasting some marshmallows, and you take your metal stick and you put your marshmallow on it, and then you put it over the heat of the fire to let that marshmallow roast. But then did you start to realize that as you kept that metal stick with the marshmallow over the fire, did that metal stick start to get hotter and hotter and hotter the longer that you kept it over the fire? So this would be an example of conduction, is when we're roasting marshmallows and the metal stick that we put the marshmallow on starts to get more and more warm the longer that we keep it over the fire. Our next key vocab term is convection, and this is the transfer of heat within a liquid or a gas. So an example of this would be heat from a campfire warming the air around it. So when you look at a campfire, you notice that if you look above it, you have all the smoke that comes from it. And if you were to put your hand over that, you would realize that the closer that you get your hand to the fire, the warmer your hand is going to get. And then the last one is radiation. And this is the transfer of heat without matter to carry it. So nothing is carrying this heat. So heat leaves an object and goes instantly to another. So an example of this would be standing near a campfire, you feel the warm air and you are feeling this heat through radiation. So maybe you're sitting in your chair and you're 10 feet from the fire and you're like, oh, I'm kind of chilly. So what do? You move closer to the fire. So now you pull your chair up a couple feet closer and you start to feel that heat. And then you start to move a little closer and it gets warmer and warmer as you move closer. And all of a sudden you get really close and you're like, wow, okay, that's really hot. So I'm going to back up a little bit. So these are going to be the 3 key vocab terms that we are going to be looking at on the next slides. All right, so again, convection. So remember, this is the transfer of a heat within a liquid or a gas. So in this picture, the heat from the stove is being transferred to the pot that is on top. And we have the liquid water that is inside that is being warmed. And then with conduction, remember again, this is the transfer or movement of heat between 2 objects that are touching. So we're going to pretend that this piece that this guy is holding is metal. And when he's holding it, the longer that he keeps it touching the flame, the warmer and more hot this is going to get to the touch. And then the last one here is radiation. And radiation is the transfer of heat without matter to carry it. So again, heat leaves an object and goes instantly to another. And one of the biggest ones that we attribute radiation to is the sun's UVA and UVB rays. So the transfer of heat goes directly from the sun to our skin. So there's no matter that is carrying it. It's coming directly from the sun and then hitting our skin. All right, so here's an example of what the IXL is going to look like. So just a reminder, an object's temperature tells you how hot or cold the object is. So hotter objects have higher temperatures than colder ones do. So think about the 2 objects that have different temperatures. If the objects are touching, heat will flow from the hotter object to the colder object. So that's why we see in this diagram here, we have the hotter object and then we have the colder object. And it says if the objects are touching, which we see they are, heat will flow from the hotter object to the colder object. So that's why we see the arrow is pointing to the right to the colder object. And so it's showing that the heat is going to move from the hotter object to the colder object. All right, so here's one more example. So we're going to compare the temperatures of the 2 blocks. So this block says it's 300 degrees Fahrenheit, and this block on the right is 220 degrees Fahrenheit. So we know that the 300 degree Fahrenheit block is hotter than the 220 degree Fahrenheit block. And as we read before, heat will always move from the hotter block to the colder block. So again, we see here that our arrow would be pointing to the right, showing that the heat is going to move from the 300 degree Fahrenheit block down to the 220 degree Fahrenheit block. And this happens every time that these blocks are touching each other. All right, so that is our lesson for today.